meantime, we invite you to prepare your favorite hot drink and check the technical requirements. Please turn on your camera and turn off your microphone. To ask questions, use the raise hand feature during interaction time or type your question in English in the chat box. This evening, we have a surprise for you from our friends from Peregrino Coffee Roaster. We will award one of you today at the end of the activity. You have to upload a story from the event to your Instagram and tag uai.internacional, peregrinocoffee.cl and uai-cl.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here, tuned from different places in Chile and abroad, to be a part of International Coffee Break Session number 3. My name is Marianela Peña. I'm Student Life Coordinator at International Relations Office. The English program and the International Relations Office from Adolfo Ibáñez University want to give you the warmest welcome to this event. The International Coffee Break Series was planned as an inviting, friendly, and interactive opportunity to engage in conversation with international speakers and at the same time put our English into practice. We are proud to have many students in this event. Flor Toledo, Director of the English program in Viña del Mar, will tell us more about it.
Thanks, Marianela. I'm very excited because today we have a lot of students supporting this initiative. From Santiago, we have Niels, Valentina, and Daniela. Francisca is joining us today from Viña del Mar. We are very happy because we have sponsors, Peregrino Coffee Roasters. We have a nice prize for you guys. So don't forget to upload a picture of this event to your story on Instagram. So you can check the box and you can check the links you have to tag. Now let's welcome Daniela. How are you?
Hi, Flor. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Tonight, we are very pleased to introduce Elsa Maxwell. Elsa is a professor of literature at the Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez in Viña del Mar. She's a member of the Faculty of Liberal Arts and teaches 2 courses, Core Literature and Humanities and Slavery and the Origins of Racism. She holds doctoral and master's degrees from Universidad de Chile. Elsa was raised in Minnesota in the United States and first came to Chile as an exchange student in 2004. She has lived in Chile for nearly 15 years. But before we listen to Elsa, Carol, director of the English program in Peñalolén, will tell us what our first activity is about.
Thank you, Daniela. Hi, everyone. We will spend the next 10 minutes working in small groups. So we have just sent you a PDF with a short activity that you can see in the chat box. And one of our monitors will be there waiting for you to invite you to reflect on a few questions. We encourage you to participate in English or in Spanish. So now when you see the box, click Entrar or Join when you see the message on your screen. And let's get back together in a while.
I think that we are all set.
Excellent. So thank you, Flor. Welcome back, everyone, to the main room. We hope you had a great experience working in your small groups to warm up for the talk right now. So remember to upload your picture in Instagram, right? And to use the tags that we shared in the chat box. So it's time. Now let's leave our international guest with you. Welcome, Elsa.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you to the Office of International Relations, as well as the English program, for this very kind invitation to share my experience with you. I am going to share my screen. I have prepared a presentation for you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Great, thank you. Once again, thank you to the university for this invitation. I'm really excited to be here to share my experience and reflections about the first anniversary of the social uprising in Chile. I also want to make a shout out to a few of my students who are here, both present and past. Thank you for making the time to be here. I'm very grateful for your presence and happy to see your faces. I wanted to introduce myself very briefly. Daniela already read my bio, but I'll highlight a few things that I think are relevant to this talk. I am originally from the United States. I was raised in the state of Minnesota. You can see that the image here on the left-hand side, the red state right in the middle of the country, very close to the Canadian border. Many lakes, it's very cold, lots of snow, but a very beautiful place, and it will always be my home. I went to college. I studied at Augsburg University in Minneapolis. I studied Spanish, the Spanish language, as well as international relations. And while I was in college, I participated in an exchange program that brought me to Chile. I spent a semester at the Universidad de Chile. I studied politics and history. I'm a big fan of history. And it was it was an amazing semester for me, very powerful to study up close Chilean society and culture. After I returned to the United States, I finished my undergraduate degree, and then I applied for a job actually back in Chile. And I was fortunate enough to be selected for that job. And when I was 22 years old, I had just graduated from university. I moved back to Santiago. The age at which many of you find yourselves in this moment, many students are about at that age. So you can imagine moving very far away from your family, from your friends, and making this great leap to a new country that I was familiar with. But one thing is studying, and another thing is living in another country. And I lived in Santiago for 10 years, and then I more recently moved to Viña del Mar to work for the Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez. I'm part of the Facultad de Artes Liberales. I am a professor of literature, and it's been one of the most rewarding and exciting jobs that I've had in my career. So today what I'd like to do is briefly share my experience as a foreigner living in Chile during the social uprising. My experience is perhaps somewhat unique because I will always be a foreigner, but I've been in Chile for about 14 or 15 years, and I also consider Chile my home. So I have both perspectives, and I hope to share them with you today. I also want to talk about how the uprising was covered in the English-speaking press. I think this is a really interesting facet about how the international newspapers and magazines presented the uprising that happened almost a year ago today. And I also want to reflect briefly on the outcomes of the estallido and how they are perceived. This is a major question that I don't think anyone at this point is really ready to answer, but I think it's important that we think about it and reflect on what has happened in the past year. So I want to start with this first question. What is it like to live through a major historical moment of political and social change in another country? Being very far away from the place that I was raised and finding myself in the situation where we see that Chilean society is very quickly and rapidly and abruptly changing. This is a question that you also, as Chileans, can ask yourself. What is it like to live through a major moment of historical change? When I refer to historical change, I'm talking about a moment that will very likely be part of the histories of contemporary Chile. When the historians in a few years write the history of this period in Chile's past, I'm very certain that the estallido social will be a big part of that history. I have placed a picture of La Moneda here on the right-hand side, because one of the things that really stood out to me when I first came to Chile as an exchange student when I was in university is how close I felt to history and how close I felt to the public sphere. I was raised in Minnesota, in a small city, very far away from Washington, D.C., very far away from our capital, very far away from our authorities and from our historical monuments and buildings. When I came to Santiago, that all changed. All of a sudden, I found myself walking by La Moneda, walking by los Tribunales de Justicia, Plaza de Armas, all these very historical, important places. And they were part of my everyday life. I walked by them almost every single day. I lived in Providencia and Parque Bustamante. And so all of a sudden I felt very connected to history. I felt it was very palpable. And that's been one of the things that I think has marked my experience as a foreigner living in Chile, is being very, very close, very connected, and very interested in these major historical events. In the years that I have been here, the 14, 15 years, I've had the experience of living through a number of historical events. The first of which, the 2010 earthquake. This caused great commotion and concern when my family found out that the earthquake had happened, a major earthquake in 8.9 that in most countries around the world would have caused great destruction and damage. However, living through the earthquake really reaffirmed to me that Chile was a safe place to live. I was very impressed with the infrastructure and with how quickly Chile was able to stand itself up again following this major natural disaster. Then the 2011 student movement of the year after the earthquake. This was very interesting to observe. I did not personally participate, but I did work in an office that was at the intersection of Portugal and Alameda. For those of you who know Santiago, you know this is the main intersection where the marches pass by. It's right across from the GAM, a very central location within the capital. And so because of the location of my office, I had a front row seat to the student movement, watching many of the marches pass by, looking at their signs and their different manifestations. This was a fascinating year for me to really once again delve into contemporary Chilean history. And now we find ourselves in the context of the social uprising from 2019. We're almost at that marking that year anniversary, and we can add to that the COVID pandemic. And of course, the pandemic is not something that's particular to Chile, but the way that it's manifested itself is very interesting, given the context of the social uprising that happened just a few months before the COVID-19 pandemic. I have placed a quote here that I thought was very indicative of the importance of this historical moment. It was published in the Foreign Policy magazine. I will read it to you. It says, "A small protest in mid-October by dozens of high school students jumping subway turnstiles over hike and transit fares has quickly exploded into a full-born Chilean uprising that has become the most significant chapter in this nation's history since the October 1988 plebiscite." Again, I think this really captured the importance of this moment in Chilean history. And I think for all of us, it's very important to sit down and think and reflect on what we're living through and how we will share this with future generations. In our conversation in the breakout groups, one of the members was just saying how important it is for us to know about our past. And Chile has a fascinating past. And here we're living, we have this very interesting position of living through it right now. So just wanted to recall some of the moments that we associate with the beginnings of the social uprising of October 18th. You're all familiar with this, so it's just a brief review to warm up our memories. The students protest the metro fare hike, those 30 pesos, evading the turnstiles. That very night on October 18th, the metro is closed down, which creates chaos in Santiago. Many people who are forced to walk home from work York. This brings about a series of peaceful protests and cacerolazos, which we've all heard, but also looting, barricades, and arson, which are much more difficult to understand. Then there was the massive march on October 5th in Plaza Italia, Plaza Dignidad, the 1.2 million people that gathered in the center of the capital, and also many other marches that happened in other major cities within the country. And of course, given all the events that were happening, the international press rapidly started to report on what was going on in Chile, this major upheaval that was going on. So I want to take a brief look at some of the coverage that was presented in major English-speaking press. I think this can be an interesting resource for you as students of English. You can go back and look at some of these articles. It's really interesting to read them now, a year later, after we lived through this estallido social, and so I invite you to take a look at some of these articles if you have time, and also great vocabulary, great way to improve your English by reading some of these articles. So a very early article that was published is in the Time magazine, October 25th, just a few days after the initial estallido on the 18th. It's interesting to note that the Time magazine in the United States is a very mainstream magazine. It's read by a lot of middle-class families. It's one of those magazines that we oftentimes find in people's homes. They have subscriptions to it. So very, very conventional, very mainstream, read in many homes throughout the United States. And so I was actually surprised to see that it was reporting on what had happened. We can see here that the title is 18 people killed as hundreds of thousands of protesters take to the streets in Chile. Here's what to know. It includes a short video of some of the manifestations and then a brief outline of what was going on, especially in Santiago following the estallido. Then The Economist. This is a British magazine, very influential amongst policymakers, economists, thinkers around the English-speaking world. They published this article on October 31st, so again, very quickly after the social uprising on the 18th. This magazine is more liberal, tends to espouse free market policies, deregulation, as well as neoliberal policies. So again, very interesting that they very quickly were reporting on what was happening in Chile. And we can see here the cleverness of the title, Piñera's Pickle, Chile's president tries to quell unrest. Piñera sets a new direction the country may not follow. So looking at what was happening, the connection between authority and the social movements. And now that I look back at this, I find it really fascinating that the image that they included on the front page of this article is precisely a reference to La Nueva Constitución. So this very early on was part of the discussion. Again, this picture was taken before October 31st. So very interesting that we're just a few weeks away from the referendum, from the plebiscite, where we will all decide what the next steps are for the country. Then the New York Times. The New York Times is one of the most influential newspapers in the United States. On November 3rd, they published this article called Chile Woke Up, Chile Despertó, Dictatorship's Legacy of Inequality Triggers Mass Protests. So looking at contemporary history, at the legacy and the history of the military period. The New York Times sent a journalist to Santiago very quickly, and she was on the streets interviewing people, firsthand account of what was going on, interviewing people in different neighborhoods. So again, a great article to read. She also published a podcast, this journalist, which I found was very interesting. And this very dramatic photograph, the colors, this is the photojournalist Tomás Munita, and I just find the color scheme here, the composition of this photograph is very powerful and a part of Santiago Centro that many of us know very well. Foreign Policy magazine. This is another United States publication on November 3rd. So again, within about a month of the original estallido, and their title was From Model to Muddle, Chile's sad slide into upheaval. And this article looks at how Chile for many years had been positioned as the leader of South America, the leader of Latin America in terms of economic development, political stability, and strong institutions. So looking into to problematizing that role or that image of Chile as the model of South America. And then video coverage. This is something that also I was surprised the amount of videos that were circulating on Facebook. My family saw many of these videos even before I showed them to them. My mother in the morning would look at the news and Chile would pop up. And so she would send me a WhatsApp message and say, "Did you see this? Did you read this?" And she was ahead of me as she was following the news. The New York Times published 2 videos, one of which chronicled many of the young people who had lost an eye or two from rubber bullets or pellets. The BBC also published a video in Spanish, and then the German press DW published a video about police violence. So again, interesting sources here and how they're looking from the outside in with a lot of investigative journaling right on the ground. So of course, with all this news circulating, and Chile was was really in the central, was in the middle of these discussions. Many of my friends and family started to send me emails, send me WhatsApp, very concerned, worried about how things were going. Oftentimes I would get questions like these. I saw the news about the protests in Chile. Is everything okay in your neighborhood? Do you think about moving back to the United States? Do you fear for your personal safety? I won't go into great detail, but this was a moment that rocked me. It was a moment where I was not concerned for my personal safety. I never felt that I was personally at risk, but it was a moment of a lot of instability. And I think one of the things I had taken for granted is how stable Chile had been or had appeared to be up until that moment of the estallido, and where it felt like everything was being turned upside down. I'm deeply invested in this country and never thought about returning to the United States. But from the outside view, many people wondered perhaps if I really was safe here. Again, I never felt at any moment that my personal safety was at risk. One of the other things about living through this, and I'm sure many of you experienced this, was recognizing the emotional toll, the emotional weight of living through a major historical moment, taking into consideration that this is not the same as living through a major traumatic event like a war or something like that. But there was an emotional toll, and as I started to talk to more of my friends here in Chile and to meet with them, just realizing how much this was affecting us in terms of our emotional well-being, the constant uncertainty and change, classes being canceled, buses being canceled, marches popping up at any time of the day, managing all of that change and having to adapt to it. Also, the news overdose. I was constantly listening to the radio, also checking social media, wanting to see what was happening, what was going on, and this eventually was draining. It was taxing. To be so hyper connected, and at one point I actually decided to cut off social media, and especially before I would go to bed, because I realized it wasn't helping me sleep well, and so really trying to also manage how much media I was consuming. Also processing the constant clashes between protesters and riot police, the human rights violations that were being registered, and also the destruction of property, trying to grasp everything that was happening. There was so much change so quickly, and so many things that were difficult to understand. Also, something particular to Viña del Mar were the fires. Some of these fires were intentional, they were arson, others were natural forest fires, but there were moments when we couldn't go outside. It was even worse than cuarentena, because we couldn't leave the house because there was smoke and ash in the air, very, very low air quality. There was even a fire very close to the campus in Viña del Mar, and I think those were some of the very difficult days because we were already stressed from everything that had happened, and on top of that we had these fires that were too close to home. Also, there was a challenge negotiating different views about the uprising. I have friends from lots of different political spectrum, some who were out there marching in the streets, who were very involved, others who didn't agree, who did not see the estallido as a positive, as a positive path for Chile. And so trying to reconcile, converse, dialogue with all these different with all these differing views also was there's a challenge to that. And lastly, a concern about the future of a country that I deeply care for. As I mentioned, there was this sense of that there was a level of instability that I was not prepared for. This was different than the student movement in 2011, which had a very distinct, very clear leaders, an organization that was linked to the universities, mostly in Santiago. But in the case of the estallido social, there was no clear articulator, and so that also created another sense of uncertainty about where things were going and how things were going to move forward. So the outcomes of the uprising, this is a huge question that I don't think I'm quite prepared to answer fully today, but a few reflections about how the country has changed in the past year, and where we're headed next. What are the next steps? And I think the response to this question, what are the outcomes or the consequences of the uprising, really depend on one's point of view, how the prism through which we see the nation and Chile's history. For some, too much destruction, too much chaos, vandalism, graffiti, disorder. This image from Plaza Italia, Plaza Dignidad, I think reflects very well this image of Plaza, the entrance to the metro, which we see was completely closed for many months. Here we see perhaps that moment of vandalism that's difficult to understand. But on the other hand, for some, this is a moment of peace, a moment of hope that Chile can move forward, can create a better future for its younger generations, better public education, better public health, better pensions. This is another view. So the possibility that there can be positive social change that has been brought about by the social movement. I wanted to share a few photographs that I took last year when my partner and I made a quick trip to Santiago. A friend was getting married, and we hadn't been to Santiago for months because of the situation. And it was very interesting to go back and to see the city. I was eager to see how the city had changed because I lived in Santiago for 10 years. I feel like it's the city that raised me as an adult. Started living there when I was 22 and lived there until I was more or less 32. So it has a special place in my heart. This image on the left-hand side, again, the same Plaza Baquedano, the entrance to the metro. We can see in the background the Teatro de Universidad de Chile. I would go there very, very often to listen to the Orquesta Sinfónica. So to see this whole plaza completely changed, all of the adoquines, the ground destroyed, the entrance completely blocked. Really interesting to see once again how the city had been affected by this. And then we see in the background it says Chile despertó. On the right hand side, I was also fascinated to see the amount of graffiti and street art that had come up, that had been produced in the context of the estallido. No más AFP, cuiden más al mal que a los niños del Sename. So we see the diversity of demands here that were included. And a couple more images that stood out to me, the reference to Catrillanca and the Mapuche history, and also this iconic image of this dog who, Matapaco, who is ever present in many of the marches. This is right outside the GAM, a very emblematic place. I think we're almost out of time, and I don't want to go overboard. One last recommendation, if you're looking for things to read, this is an article that just came out by the New Yorker, a very influential, very important magazine in the United States, some of the best writing in the United States, titled Chile at the Barricades. It's written by Daniel Alarcón, who's a Peruvian writer and novelist, and he makes a very interesting analysis of the effect of the pandemic on the estallido social. So this is some very current analysis that I would highly recommend. And that is all that I have prepared for you today.
Thank you, Elsa, for such an amazing talk and for sharing your interesting point of view. Niels and I will be receiving your questions. So now, we would like to invite our audience to share their insights with us by raising hands or typing your questions in the chat box.
Okay, so the first question would be, Elsa, how would you relate what's happening in countries like in the US and Hong Kong with what's happening here in Chile?
That is a fascinating question, and it's very interesting because the United States is also in a moment of extreme change, social change, political change. Just last year, we witnessed the death of George Floyd, and then the riots and the protests, some of them violent, some of them peaceful, that ensued his death. And it was interesting because my brother lives very close to where George Floyd was killed, and many of those manifestations were in his neighborhood. And he as we were speaking on the phone, he said to me, I finally understand what you went through. I finally understand what you lived through, because it was the first time that he had also been in the middle of these major social explosions, really surrounding George Floyd's death. So when people ask me if I would feel safer in the United States, if I should return to the United States, I oftentimes say no. I think Chile is much safer than the United States when we're talking about earthquakes or social movements. But yes, I think there's a moment of global change going on right now, and these types of uprisings will continue to happen as we move forward.
Well, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Camila Navarro.
Hi, Professor Maxwell. Thank you very much for your talk, and I'm very grateful to say that I am your current student at your literature course. And of course, thank you very much all to have the opportunity to be here, because I mean, for me, it is amazing to learn everything that you said. And I would like to ask you 3 short questions. 2 of them are related, like the reason why you came here to Chile. Like, why did you choose Chile in the first place? You were young, you were a student, and why Chile? And have you ever thought you were going to live so many years in Chile, or just when you had to take the decision was only just for an exchange? And the last question is very short. Have you ever lived something as the estallido social or any kind of social movement before in United States?
Thank you, Camila. It's great to receive your questions. So the first one, why Chile? I had studied abroad in college, done an exchange program in Central America, Nicaragua, Guatemala, El Salvador. I had learned about the history of those countries, and I was eager to learn more. And I realized that Chile had similarities, but also differences. And when I was in the university, I actually had a professor who was Chilean. She was one of my Spanish professors, and she said, "Why don't you go to Chile? I think you'd be interested." So she guided me and sent me on my path. If I had anticipated or planned to stay so many years, no. My plan was to come for 1 or 2 years. I had this job right out of college, and I thought 2 or 3 years, I'll stay and live in Chile and then go back to the United States. I'm very close to my family. That's been the hardest thing for me, is to be so far away from them. That's the one thing that's difficult, I think, to reconcile. But I thought 2 or 3 years. However, life happened. I went to graduate school. I loved my job. I didn't want to give it up. And so I've stayed all these years. I did have a 2-year stint. I went back to the United States briefly in 2013 and 2014. And with respect to the last question, if I've ever lived anything similar in the United States, no. As I said, Minnesota is up until now has been quite far removed from major political movements, with the exception of now what's happened around surrounding George Floyd and the movement that happened there. This has definitely been the biggest social movement that I've ever lived through, following the 2011 student movement.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Camila.
Thank you, Brenda, for that question. The next question is for Gabriel Marigovich.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say hi to my dear profe from last semester. I had such a great time in the literature class about slavery from Latin America, and I probably say that has like a really deep impact in my perspective and in my competences for like to be a future professional. And I have more like is for an opinion question, is that I agree totally with you with all of your statements that you made, but do you have like some advice for like this new generation that's going to be the new change agents in the future, especially talking about we have a lot of opportunities and we're going to have some big like laboral networks, so we can definitely could make an impact. So what would you advise for us for like in your perspective of history and from like nearly a Chilean perspective, you know? So what could you advise for us?
Hi, Gabriel. It's great to see your face, and I'm so glad you were able to be here. Gabriel took one of my courses last semester. That's a great question. It's a big question. Advice for this generation. This is one of the generation that has more access to information, more access to education, to university education, and with that, as you say, Gabriel, there's a responsibility to be agents of positive change. I think on the one hand, being very strategic and thinking about what are the consequences of being agents of social change. We can learn a lot of lessons from the past and courses where we look at the history of slavery, for example, the activism around that, what works and what doesn't work. I think it's really important to be strategic, because otherwise we can perhaps take paths that aren't as effective. So I think knowing our history, looking at other examples from not only Chile, but around the world can be very, very useful. I think also just having so much access to information, trying to really have it at our fingertips. When we have a question about something, we hear about a social phenomena, historical phenomena, Googling it and Wikipedia, and look at what happened, really being knowledgeable about our past, about the history of the West. And I also think the classical works have so much to offer. The books that we read in core, there are so many lessons there that I think can also be applicable to moving forward, to creating more just and to more healthy societies, more environmentally friendly societies as well. It's a big question, Gabriel. I don't know if I have all the answers, but there are a few thoughts that come to mind.
Totally. Thank you very much. That's really constructive for me. And
thank you, Gabriel, for that question. Now, Delfina raised her hand.
Thank you. And I found very interesting everything you said. It was quite an excellent experience to hear about that. And I wanted to ask you, because I'm not from Chile, I'm from Argentina, and when we heard about this, something that it stuck in my mind was the phrase, it isn't 30 pesos, it's 30 years, I think, something like that. And until today, I haven't found an answer for what that meant. What's your opinion on that phrase? I would like to know. Thank you.
Yes, Delfina, it's very nice to meet you, and thank you for reminding us all of one of the also very emblematic phrases that we all witnessed in many of the marches. No solo 30 pesos, sino 30 años. I think that's also it's really indicative of the importance of looking back and knowing our history once again. It reminds me of I took a political science course when I was in college, and one of the theories we talked about is societies that are so unjust that certain groups are marginalized, and eventually they're going to want back in. We see examples in the United States with African American history, and so I think it's almost like a pressure cooker that eventually will explode. I think in this particular case, it's referring to the 30 years since the return to democracy and some of the policies that have been put in place both by the left and by the right, and a disconnect of in general the political class from the reality of many Chileans. And again, all across the political spectrum. I don't think there are any political parties that are exempt from that. But looking at how that social pressure builds up, and at some point, if it's not attended to, if the political class does not attend to it, it can get out of control. And I think that's perhaps one way of understanding that reference to those 30 years since Chile has returned to a democratic state.
Thank you, Delfina, for that question. Our last question will be for Constanza Rodriguez. And if anyone would like to send a question for Elsa, we have her email if you would like to contact her.
Thank you. Hello, Professor. Thank you for the talk. It was very interesting. And well, my question is kind of short. And I was wondering do you think that the social uprising, I mean, it's kind of related to the last question, but do you think it would have happened without the students jumping that day on the subway or however? I've always wondered, so I've never gotten the answer.
That's a great question, Connie. When we look back at how this event was recorded and the journalists registered it, many of them point to that very pivotal moment when the secondary students started to jump the turnstiles and really see that as the initiating moment.
Bueno, yo hoy día no tuve tiempo de revisar.
That always has to happen at least once. I wonder if it would have happened. It's interesting because the 2006 Pingüinos movement, the 2011 movement, which were really agents for change. And then once again, we see how the secondary students have taken on that role. I think that was a pivotal moment, and without them, perhaps the social uprising would not have happened in the way that it did. I think eventually some of those social pressures were going to manifest themselves in different ways, but this seemed to be the catalyzing agent around which many parts of society decided to respond. It'd be interesting to ask those same secondary students when they look back after a year if they feel partly responsible for the what happened following October 18th, because it definitely was perhaps much bigger than what they ever imagined.
Sure. Thank you.
Well, we would like to thank everyone for the wonderful experience for this evening. If you'd like to keep in touch, you can send an email to Elsa, the email that Carol already sent through the chat box. Elsa, would you like to add anything else as a final thought?
Thank you, Niels. Thank you all for your enthusiasm for being here. I know you all have many demands and many things going on in your lives. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen and share with me your great questions, your smiling faces. Thank you for keeping your cameras on. That always adds so much to the interaction. It's much more human. So thank you so much for your presence. And if anyone wants to stay in touch, please do email me. Do not hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Elsa, and thanks everyone for joining us today. But before we leave, we are more than happy to announce our winner. So our winner is at Connie Castro with 2 O's, @ Connie Castro con 2 O. So congratulations, you're today's winner of Peregrino Coffee Roasters International Coffee Break Pack. We will be contacting you soon to send it to your home.
Thank you again, everyone, for participating today in our 3rd coffee break talk. And we look forward to see you guys in the next one in November. Please answer a quick survey that we're going to share with you. It won't take you more than 2 minutes. We just want to know your opinion. So thank you again, and we'll see you in the next coffee break. So bye, everyone.
Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for your questions and participation and for keeping your cameras on. We have one more event, so stick with us. See you in a couple of weeks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.